With the All-Star break coming to a close and marking the halfway point of the season, I thought I would take a look at and share some players that I believe are poised to have a much better second half of the season than their first half. First, I want to mention that practically all the stats I bring up in this video are from July 14th, which is right before games return from the All-Star break. So there may be just a few differences in the information, but there shouldn't be too much from when this is released and when I'm writing it. With that out of the way, which MLB stars could have a great second half? There are a lot of expectations given to some of MLB's top prospects, but it's easy for people to forget just how difficult it is for young players to not only have a strong transition through the multiple levels of the minor leagues, but also the transition into the major leagues. Bobby Witt Jr. is no exception to these expectations. Witt was drafted second overall in the 2019 MLB draft by the Kansas City Royals. He played 37 games in the Rookie Arizona League that year, and with the cancellation of the 2020 minor league season due to COVID-19, Witt continued his minor league development through the Royals' alternate training site and instructional programs they have at Kauffman Stadium, which leads to a majority of Witt's minor league game development taking place in 2021. Witt played 124 games that year in both AA and AAA, amassing a slash line of 290, 361, 575 for an OPS of 936 with 27 stolen bases and 14 home runs. Witt really showed his potential before the 2022 season, where in 12 spring training games he slashed 406, 441, 781 for a huge 1222 OPS. Obviously, the sample size is small here, but it gave the Royals an easy decision to give Witt a starting spot on the team's Major League roster in 2022. Despite generating a lot of hype going into that season as MLB Pipeline's #1 ranked prospect, Witt's season was slightly underwhelming, as the expectations are always super high for top prospects, like I said, but he really had a respectable production. He slashed 257, 294, 428 for a 722 OPS and an OPS plus of 103. To give a little background, OPS plus is basically just factoring in the ballpark and normalizing those numbers across the entire league, where 100 is the league average. It makes it much easier to see how much better or worse a hitter was in comparison to the rest of the league. So for Witt, he was 3% better than the league average hitter since he had an OPS plus of 103, and the league average is 100. Obviously, being a league average hitter is nothing spectacular, but it is far from the worst way to start your career. But he also hit 20 home runs, stole 30 bases, and accumulated 2.3 FWAR and 0.9 BWAR in 150 games last year. I don't think this is anything to complain about, but people really want to see top prospects hit that superstar potential immediately, and they start to give up on players way too quickly. Now to take a look at 2023, he's had an eerily similar stat line so far, slashing 257, 300, 442, with the exact same OPS plus of 103 as of July 14th. So with almost identical hitting results, how can we expect a change from Bobby Witt Jr. for the second half of the year? So far, the biggest difference in Witt's production is on the defensive side of the ball. Last season, Witt had the worst defensive runs saved out of everyone in the shortstop position at -18 defensive runs saved. 90 games into this season, he has -5 defensive runs saved, which isn't anything to write home about, but it's definitely an improvement. However, the biggest change is Witt's outs above average. At this point in the season, Witt ranks 4th out of all shortstops in outs above average with 8, which is a massive improvement over his 2022 season where he had the 3rd lowest outs above average at -9. Witt's defensive improvements are why he already has more BWAR and FWAR in 60 fewer games played than last season. With Witt making significant defensive adjustments, will he be able to improve his hitting to reach that superstar level we all expected to see? There are a few clear factors affecting Witt's offensive production, such as his walk rate, which is one of the lowest among qualified hitters in the league. Although, Witt never really had a super high walk rate in the minor leagues either, walking at 9% of his plate appearances, which is toward the bottom half of qualified minor leaguers in 2021. Despite that, it still declined to 5.4% this year and 4.7% last year. So while I think that could be a factor, I don't think it is the main issue, as walks were never really part of Witt's game to begin with, and it would require a complete alteration in his approach that just simply can't be done in the middle of the season. It's easy to see that the clear problem in Witt's offense is his power. In 2021, Witt had a 575 slugging percentage and a 286 ISO in the minor leagues, which had him ranked in the top 15 and top 20 of all minor leaguers respectively. To explain ISO, it means isolated power, which only factors in extra base hits. We want to use it here to see just how much raw power has gone away in Witt's hitting. Thus far into his major league career, Witt has had an ISO of 178 and a slugging of 433, which are both far below what he was capable of in the minor leagues. I really think that Witt is able to bring some of that back into his game and have a very strong second half of the year. This next section, I want to bring up some sabermetrics and advanced stats because I think it's unavoidable when trying to predict how a player's going to do in the future. So I want to give a little explanation and insight before I get back to Bobby Witt Jr., as I really don't want to leave people in the dark when it comes to this topic. I want to make it clear that I don't fully know the intricacies behind every Saber metric, but I want to try to explain it in the way that makes sense for me. So first, I want to bring up WOBA, which in the simplest terms is a more precise OPS. According to Fangraphs, WOBA more accurately weighs all the types of ways that a hitter can get on base and provide runs for their team. Personally, I use OPS more when talking about baseball than WOBA because it's just more widespread, it's more recognized, and honestly usually it gets the same point across, albeit technically with less accuracy. So you're probably wondering why it even matters. Well, it matters in the context of xWOBA. The X in xWOBA is expected, and it uses different factors to determine what a player's WOBA would be if everything went exactly as expected. Obviously, baseball is a sport where not everything goes as expected, but over the course of 162 games, usually ends up equaling out in some way. xWOBA essentially just takes into account the quality of contact, launch angles, and walk rates to figure out what a player's WOBA should be. Also, they implemented not too long ago that certain types of batted balls, generally ones that are like topped in the infield, will take into account their sprint speed. So we can use the difference between a player's xWOBA and their WOBA as an easy indicator whether someone is getting lucky or unlucky during the season. I don't think xWOBA is the perfect metric or the end-all be-all in player evaluation, as there are some players that consistently perform above it like Jose Altuve, or consistently perform below it like Brian Mountcastle. However, it is more often than not a correct estimate of how someone should be hitting, and I think it's necessary to talk about when trying to predict future success for a player. So where does Bobby Witt Jr. rank here? Well, Bobby Witt Jr. has had a WOBA of 318 so far this year, which is not much higher than his WOBA from last year of 311. Now, the expected stats can really help us here. Witt had a 313 xWOBA last year, meaning he basically performed as he was expected to perform. However, so far this year, Witt has had an xWOBA of 364, which is 35th in the entire league and 3rd among all shortstops. WOBA is not the only expected stat, as there's also expected slugging and expected batting average. Witt's expected batting average is 290 and his expected slugging is 515. Both of which are significantly higher than his results this year. His walk rate is only slightly up, but he is hitting the ball hard way more often than he was last year. Overall, despite the fact that not only has Witt's defensive performance improved a lot in comparison to last season, Witt has improved his hitting significantly above last year as well, but his results have not quite reflected that so far. This is why I think Witt is going to really pop off in the second half of the season, as it seems clear that he has had really steady growth so far, but we have not been able to see it yet in his results. Now, it's just as possible for Witt to have a bad second half, and we aren't able to see the potential of his first half, but I really think that he can have a great year overall if he does not try to change his approach too much and stick with what he's doing. If he does that, the results will definitely come. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has had a really interesting first few seasons of his career. Being the son of a Hall of Famer, there's a lot to live up to, and it can't be easy for Vlad to try to match or surpass his father. Guerrero had spent a lot of time in the minor leagues, primarily because he signed with the Blue Jays at just 16 years old. However, Guerrero really started raking in the minor leagues during his age 18 season in 2017. Then, in 2018, Guerrero slashed 381, 437, 636 in 95 games across multiple minor league levels, including Double and AAA, which is absolutely absurd for any player, let alone for a 19-year-old. After continuing his dominance for 13 games in 2019, Guerrero got the call up to the majors and has played in almost every Blue Jays game since. Although, Guerrero was only really able to replicate his results in the major leagues in 2021, which many people thought to be the beginning of a fantastic career. In 161 games that year, Guerrero slashed 311, 401, 601 for an OPS plus of 167. Guerrero also smacked 48 bombs, 111 RBIs, and he finished second unanimously in MVP voting to Shohei Ohtani and led the American League in runs scored, home runs, on-base percentage, slugging, and OPS plus. At the time, it seemed like the breakout was here and it was very real. But in the last season and a half, Guerrero has not performed as people thought he would. When looking at Guerrero's career stats side by side, it's starting to look like 2021 is the outlier as opposed to the new norm that we thought it'd be. Guerrero has still been a well above average bat for the Jays in the last season and a half, but people are starting to wonder, will we ever see 2021 Vladdy again? I believe that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is going to have a monster second half of the season that will be much closer to his performance in 2021, but not quite as good. The reason for this is that despite the fact that many of Guerrero's results seem to mirror his 2022 season, a large part of Guerrero's expected numbers and advanced statistics that we just talked about seem to mirror his 2021 season instead. I want to show how Guerrero's barrels per plate appearance, ground ball percent, sweet spot percent, expected batting average, xWOBA, xslugging, and hard hit percent compare in 2021, 2022, and the first half of 2023. But first, since I haven't talked about it yet, I want to explain barrels, sweet spot, and hard hit rate. Hard hit rate is basically how often a player is hitting the ball hard, while barrels and sweet spots are ways to see how a player is able to reach a certain threshold for a well-hit ball by taking into account the exit velocity and launch angles. The reason we care about this is that if a player is hitting the ball hard, that is objectively a good thing. But if they keep topping the ball or getting under it, they aren't going to see any results that way. So that's why sweet spot and barrels are meant to help quantify the best possible ways to make contact and get hits. For example, according to MLB and Statcast, in 2016, all barreled balls result in a batting average of .822 and a slugging of 2.386. Obviously, this is ridiculously good, but it also shows how difficult it really is to barrel the ball. Only 16 players barrel the ball over 10% of the time so far this year. Sweet spot percent is like a more lenient version of barrels that only takes into account a good launch angle, because that can still result in base hits without having to absolutely crush the ball. Now, if we look at the comparison of Guerrero's last 3 seasons, we can see that almost every stat is much closer to his 2021 season than his 2022 season. Starting with hard hit rate, sweet spot percent, and barrels, his hard hit rate and sweet spot percent are almost identical, and his barrels per plate appearance are very close as well. For these stats, he's clearly doing much better than he was last year. Moving on to his expected stats, he's not quite at the level of his 2021 season, but he's much closer to that year than last year. However, you can clearly see Guerrero is well under the mark for these stats so far. Finally, I bring up ground ball percent because there are many players like Guerrero that hit the ball hard but have issues lifting the ball. This can be very difficult for a player to fix because it's entirely dependent on adjusting their swing path. But Guerrero has improved his ground ball rate this year as well. He was 7th in the league in ground balls last year and is 29th so far this year. Every sign is pointing to Guerrero having a huge bounce back, but it just hasn't happened yet. Well, almost every sign. There's one last thing that is really setting Guerrero's 2021 season apart from the rest, and that's the walks. As you can see, Guerrero has had an almost identical walk rate in every season except 2021. Those walks could be the difference between a Guerrero bounce back and never seeing his 2021 form again. Although, the hope I have is that once Guerrero starts getting hot, pitchers will start being more cautious and that will lead to an increase in walks. So similarly to Bobby Witt Jr., Guerrero is having results that are a lot like his previous season, but we should actually start seeing much better results than he has had if he keeps hitting the same way for the whole year, which is why I think Guerrero is bound to have a big second half. Ronald Acuña Jr. could be even better the rest of the year. So you're probably wondering why I'm even bringing up Acuña for a video like this, when he's on pace for a 10-WAR season and has easily been the unanimous frontrunner for the National League MVP so far. Well, Acuña has actually been underperforming, believe it or not. For Acuña to keep up the pace he's had, he would end up having a historic season. The only thing holding Acuña back is his defense, but he's been so unbelievable at the plate, I don't think anyone really cares that much. Acuña had a bit of a down year last year, but with how he's performed this year and every other season other than 2022, it's clear that the recovery from the torn ACL had an effect on him. One of the biggest changes to Acuña's game this year is his strikeouts. He is currently striking out 12% of the time, which is in the top 5% of the league. Meanwhile, every other season, he was in the bottom half of the league in strikeout rate, and miraculously, he's somehow hitting the ball just as hard while whiffing less often, which is insane to me. Acuña is slashing .331, .408, .582, which is clearly elite, but he might end up being even better. This is also insane, as Acuña is not only underperforming, he is underperforming by a pretty significant amount. Acuña is expected to have a higher batting average and slugging than he already does now. Like I said for everyone else, if Acuña is able to keep this up, we could see a second half that is even better than his first half. A first half where he hit 21 home runs while stealing 41 bases. A 40-40 season has only been done by 4 players, and he's on pace for a 40-80 season. Honestly, Acuña being the first player in the 50-50 club is not out of the realm of possibility here. He would have to have a big home run streak in his second half, but I think that it can actually happen. So while everyone's already been watching Acuña this year, watch out for the potential of an even better second half. So because this video has taken me a bit longer than I expected, before we wrap this up, let's take a quick look at how these three have performed in the last 2 weeks or so. Bobby Witt Jr. is currently slashing 200, 216, 400, which is not very good, and it seems like he started the second half with a slump, but I didn't have him in this video if I wasn't confident he could get out of it. For Vladimir Guerrero Jr., he's off to a pretty good start, slashing 292, 358, 502, which is much better than his 246, 323, 398 first half. Ronald Acuña Jr. is unsurprisingly doing just as well, with a slash line of 328, 400, 574. There's still a lot of time left, and around 2 weeks doesn't change my mind that these players could still have even better second halves. If we all knew what would happen every year, nobody would really care. I could be wrong about all three of these guys, and I could be right about all three, because baseball is just weird like that. I would like to revisit these predictions when the season's finally over, but I'll worry about that when I get there. And if you made it this far in the video, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.